Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the sort of new but not really film by Matt Reeves called The Batman. So I guess first things first, before you kind of like decide you want to continue listening, I guess I should explain my biases. Basically, I'm not really that into the whole superhero thing. It's never been like a massive appeal in terms of cinema for me. I've never been like big on the comics or anything like that. I'm one of those people that like I never had like a massive issue with it, especially, but now these days I'm just very fatigued. To the point that I refuse to spend money going to the cinema to watch, like whatever Marvel films coming out, DC, don't care. Like if it's superhero related, like I'm just not interested in any way. I don't want to spend money on that because I want to encourage other type of films to be made. Obviously, it's a very small thing, but it's what I've decided to do because I'm just very done with it. So those are very much my biases coming in. But I've seen the film now, and I gotta say, there's definitely a decent amount about this one that kind of separates it a lot from, especially a lot of the Marvel movies. It definitely is trying to evoke the same kind of like grit as the Nolan trilogy, or at least the first two films from the Nolan trilogy, I guess you could say. But yeah, if you're someone who's coming into this and you're really not into all the like Marvel stuff, you're feeling like it's oversaturated, there's not really as much craft in it as you'd like, it's more about like the overall story rather than the individual filmmaking or anything like that, then I would definitely say the Batman has more in it for you than the average person who's after that thing. It's got a more unique tone that's in line with detective films, which I think everyone is basically aware of at this point. It kind of evokes a lot of like a Seven energy or Zodiac, something like that. It's like a slow-moving kind of detective thriller, I guess you could say, for the most part. It occasionally does have like Batman action scenes, but they never feel as kind of like flashy or anything like that you might see in even some of the even in like the Dark Knight. Like I know not there weren't a ton of action sequences in that film that were like super flashy, but it's even more toned down in this one. It's just like, for the most part, it's just like Batman running in a building and punching dudes. It's not yeah, he kind of gets fucked up a couple points as well. It's not really like a film that's super about that. And that kind of brings me to the biggest like double-edged sword of this film, essentially. So like the thing that it prioritizes above everything else is tone and atmosphere. The look of the film, the soundtrack to the film, the way the characters act, the just mood of each scene all conveys one very kind of like that low-key kind of like slightly tense like LA noir type vibe, right? That's kind of what it's going for the most part. That smoky, hazy kind of feel. And unfortunately, as a result of that, the film doesn't really have too many other tricks to surprise you with. Is you're essentially going to have this film where Batman goes to a variety of different places, a variety of different settings, trying to work out the Riddler's next move and stuff like that. You're getting this over and over again, and there's like a scene where he's investigating, then you'll get this like revelation, and he goes to the next move, and it just continues along like this at a steady pace for a runtime of about 3 hours, more or less, and that's just it. Like I said, essentially the biggest like double-edged sword, because the tone is really quite cool. It's a little bit much, maybe a tiny bit cheesy with the whole like emo aesthetic thing at some moments, but for the most part, it works pretty well. It definitely evokes like the emotions it's trying to evoke. But at the same time, that doesn't hold a film on for 3 hours. This film gets incredibly repetitive after a certain point, and I think some of the cracks in the way they're doing things show by the end, in the sense that you don't really like have like a strong sense of any other characters, especially. That even the plot isn't like ultra satisfying after it's done. Like it all just feels like it was a random sequence of events. There's no like, it didn't feel like overly smart in terms of how it was written, or and there aren't like tiny like details to pick up on in the background. Everything's very much fed to the audience. So it's like, I would almost describe this film as, in a weird way, like a very very well made popcorn flick that just for me unfortunately got a bit boring by the end. As far as other criticisms go, I would say that like there's, because of the underdeveloped characters, it means many of the moments they do focus on character, and there aren't many to be fair, but the moments they do just feel a little bit kind of like wishy-washy and lacking the impact they should have. Like the big obvious ones are like the few times that Catwoman kind of interacts in a romantic way With Batman, those just feel like, okay, we're just throwing these in because we kind of have to some extent. They don't feel like supernatural, especially, which is kind of, I guess, somewhat unfortunate. Um, I will say that I do really like Robert Pattinson as the Batman. I fucking loved Colin Farrell as the Penguin, which I'm pretty sure everyone has said that he puts on like an awesome performance. He's really, really captivating as a character. It's almost a shame there wasn't more of him in the film. Another thing, actually, one thing I did really appreciate, speaking of the lack of characters, one thing that didn't lack character, actually, was the city of Gotham itself. Like, the look of the film and the amount of, like, grit and crime on display and kind of just low petty stuff as well is, like, it all works really well and makes you... I think this is probably the best a film has demonstrated the character of Gotham itself. And it's not just done through the visuals, it's also done through, like, you know, like a large part of the theme... Or, sorry, not the theme. A large part of the plot of the film is in relation to Bruce Wayne or Batman's wealth, because obviously he's part of the Wayne like family. So they kind of explore that idea, the kind of person that Bruce's dad was, and that kind of thing. And this kind of ties into the character of Gotham because it talks more about, like, you know, the wealth disparity, the corruption in the police force, and all of that's like tied into this. These shady underground dealings to get, like, you know, massive drug operations off the ground. This is all like a huge part of the film, which makes sense again because it's like this more detective-y type thriller. You need something to kind of investigate, and how the Wayne's wealth ties into that, and the character of Bruce's dad is all like important to it. So the character of Gotham itself, through all these little details that are explored fairly well, those are all incredibly captivating. I almost wish there was more of that in the film, to be honest, and they took the concept a little bit further, because I think that would have been a really interesting direction for the plot to go that isn't necessarily tied into the villains but could tie back into them somehow. And for me, it didn't feel like that happened particularly well. Like the Riddler's motivations, just like, they weren't super specific in the end, which is actually pretty disappointing. I really like the idea of a villain that tried, like in Seven, the way the villain in that works is it's not necessarily super specific in that either, but he very much is trying to convey a point, whereas the Riddler is just sort of like, my life was shit because I was a poor orphan and got thrown to the wayside, and you, Bruce Wayne, you were up in that ivory orphan tower. You know, it's just like a very it just feels almost a bit too generic, I guess, of a motivation, which is just a real shame. Because, again, I thought the Riddler was a pretty captivating villain. Not, like, incredible or anything, but definitely, like, pretty decent. So, yeah, I thought that was kind of unfortunate, too. But I think that just somewhat ties back into what I was saying about the characters in general, how they all kind of just don't feel, like, ultra-developed, because that's not really what the film's going for. But yeah, I think that's basically everything I have to say about this film. If you're looking for if you're in a position like me and you really are just done with like the superhero stuff, honestly, you could skip this one. It's not like, it really isn't like an essential watch or anything. But if you like some of the film's influences, you're not super sick of the superhero stuff, but you're not necessarily like crazy into Marvel or anything, I think there's a decent amount for those types of people to enjoy here. Like I said, from a like technical perspective, I feel like most of what's on display here is very competent and has its own flavor, but it's unfortunate those elements weren't pushed like further. And also, I wish the plot and just the characters and how the sequence of events unfolds, I wish all of that was a little bit smarter. Unfortunately, I just felt like this was a bit more of a substance over style type film. There were even a couple moments that felt borderline dumb, where, like, you know, when they capture the Riddler and then to make sure the audience clock in, there's a camera close up of the question mark in the coffee cup that he's done. Like, you know, it's almost like just a little bit too much, a tiny bit too cheesy. I also feel like, you know, emo Batman was probably a bit much at points. I could have toned down a tiny bit on some of the moodiness there a little bit. I think it would have made maybe Bruce Wayne feel like a bit more of a character rather than a caricature to some extent. But, you know, all those complaints, especially to the type of people that would be super into the tone of this film, are relatively minor, I think. Other people are enjoying this more than I did. So, you know, if this sounds like your bag, if you're listening and you're like, this sounds like an amazing film, what do you have to complain about? Then definitely give it a watch, because it's definitely going to appeal to you, or at least I'd be very shocked if it doesn't. So, yeah, it's a good way to kill 3 hours, if nothing else, I suppose. Bust out the popcorn, have some mates round, and yeah, it'll be a good time. But yeah, cheers for listening. Hopefully I'll see you all around. Peace out, everybody.